we'll go over to the Art Museum. And after that, to the concert at the Civic Auditorium. Boy, what an evening we'll have, huh?
We better have. I'm blowing my whole month's allowance to pay for it.
Ah, you're a real human being, Zelda. But why are you doing all this? I mean, I know I'm charming and debonair and witty, but aren't you overdoing things a little?
Correction. You are not charming, debonair, and witty. You are callow, rough-hewn, and uncultured. But I love you, and I'm stuck with you.
Zelda!
Dobie, once a gal who's dreamy, Dobie. Once a gal who's creamy, Dobie. Once a gal to call his own. Is she blonde, is she tall, is she dark, is she small, is she any kind of dreamboat at all? No matter, he's hers and hers alone. Dobie!
Our guest today was a regular on one of my favorite TV shows, and I bet it's one of your favorites too, The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis. She played Dobie's, well, love interest is probably the wrong expression, his faded love, Zelda Gilroy. Back then, she was known as actress Sheila James. Today, she's Sheila James Kuehl, and I hope I get this title right because it's prestigious. She's the Los Angeles County Supervisor for the 3rd District. Do I have that right?
You do.
Oh, good.
I think back east you call them commissioners, the people who run your counties, but we call them supervisors here. So there's 5 of us running LA County, which actually has 10 million people in it. So we're bigger than all but 7 states. So I'm having a great time.
Well, we want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to chat with us today. You know, whenever I do these interviews, I feel like I'm Ralph Edwards, because I always want to take people right back to the very beginning. And for you, that means the last days of what we now call the golden age of radio.
That's correct. I think it probably was the last sort of family series on radio. There was a woman named Penny Singleton, actress, who had played Blondie in the Dagwood and Blondie movies, and then they did a radio series where she played that part. And she decided she wanted to go out on her own, so she had a show where she had 2 daughters, and I was the younger daughter.
The Penny Singleton Show.
Sue, what did I tell you the other day?
Which day?
Thursday.
On Thursday, you told me a lady always washes the bathtub after using it.
Friday, then.
On Friday, you told me a lady would never say, "I'd like to kick Freddie Nagel's teeth out."
In addition to Penny Singleton, you also worked with Jim Backus on this show and Bea Benaderet.
Gail Gordon, too.
You're in lofty company right from the very beginning.
Well, very. I mean, it was incredibly good training. I think I was probably 9 years old. We actually did the radio shows at NBC at Sunset and Vine with an audience. And, you know, the ushers that seated people were dressed up. They wore white gloves and, uniforms with shiny brass buttons. And we were in Studio B, and in Studio C was the Cisco Kid and Poncho. And in Studio A, Bob Hope did his show with his girl singer, Doris Day. I mean, it was quite an interesting and wonderful time.
And to think it only gets better for you, because then you get into television.
Right. The Stu Erwin Show, that's actually is an interesting story, too. All the series were live before then, or Kinescope. Mm-hmm. No one had started filming anything for television, and the movie studios were going cuckoo because they thought they were going to have to close. Television was going to take everything over. So Hal Roach Sr. and his son, Hal Jr., had a studio in Culver City and decided that the answer was they would film half-hour shows for episodic television. And so the Stu Erwin Show was actually the first show to be filmed, and that was in 1950. And we did that show not with an audience, just on a soundstage like, movies. We did it for 6 years, and we did 3 shows a week. 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 3 sho
Medal, America's #1 all-purpose flour, and Wheaties, Breakfast of Champions, present June and Stu Erwin in Trouble with Father.
Did Max Schulman, the creator of Dobie Gillis, see you on that program and then ask you to audition for Zelda Gilroy?
I didn't meet Max Schulman until I went for the interview, but Dwayne Hickman, who was to star in Dobie, actually did one of those Stu Erwin shows. And then in between shooting, we would get hiatus, and so we would work in other shows. So I worked with Dwayne in the show that he did with Bob Cummings.
Right.
So I had worked with him a couple of times, and Rod Amato, who was the director of the Dobie Gillis shows, was directing the Bob Cummings show. So when the part came up, it was the 4th show in the first year for Dobie Gillis, and Max had written this girl, Zelda Gilroy, in his book. And so they wanted to use her as a character in one show, because it was called The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, and there wasn't supposed to be a long-running girl in it.
Right.
So they read the script, and Rod and Dwayne said to Max, we think we have the perfect person for this. Let's interview her. So my agent, got me over to the studio. Rod said, you'll be perfect. Go over and talk to Max. So I went to meet with him, and when I first walked in, I actually couldn't see him. He was behind this huge desk, and Max was only about an inch taller than I am, which is not tall.
Right.
And so from behind the desk, I hear him say, "What's the first line?" And I said, "I love you." And he said, "You're hired." So it wasn't much of an interview. He kiddingly told me later that he hired me because I was the only girl that came in that was shorter than him, and that was important.
Well, you were a tiny little thing, but you know what? It's a good thing that you had all of that acting experience under your belt right before Dobie Gillis, because Zelda didn't have dialogue. I mean, Dobie would ask her a question, and she would give him a rapid-fire monologue.
Filled with facts often, too, because
Yes.
Zelda was the smartest kid in the room, always, in the school, always, and probably in the world. So she was the one that was always convincing people to do things and peppering them with facts, and not alternate facts either, but real facts. So, yeah, there was a lot to memorize, but, there are a couple of things that everybody's good at. I mean, different things for different people. One of them for me was always being able to remember my lines. I don't know why.
Zelda, I am, of course, flattered.
Now, don't get a swelled head. You're nothing so special. You're dumb as a post, you're pigeon-toed, and you'll be bald before you're 30.
Is that so? Well, I don't want to be unkind, but you're not exactly a traffic stopper yourself.
Yeah, we're a couple of dogs, all right. Still, no, we're not too repulsive. Anyway, what's the difference? We're victims of propinquity.
What's that?
Propinquity. Nearness, closeness. Sigafoos and Wendling of Harvard, in a study of 2,900 married couples, proved that in 87% of the cases, the couples first fell in love because of propinquity. You put a boy and a girl close to each other for long enough, and it's bound to happen. It's a scientific fact.
No offense, Zelda, but I don't love you.
You will. You're Gillis, and I'm Gilroy. Don't forget they seat students alphabetically in science classes. You'll be sitting next to me all year long, and next year, too. And then when we go on to medical school, 8 more years of propinquity. Don't fight it, Dobie. You can't beat science.
And Zelda had to be the most pragmatic character on that show. I mean, before anybody else knew what was happening, she knew exactly.
Well, she was very sure of herself,
Right.
No question. But, it's interesting. 10 years later in the 70s, I started getting letters from young women who were sort of waking up to, I guess, what was then called feminism, but women's rights, or at least sort of how much they had taken for granted about what they should not do, and how Zelda had been a role model for them. Zelda made it okay to be smart. She made it okay to have ideas. She made it okay, though she always did it for Dobie, made it okay to kind of run things. Like she wanted Dobie to run for office so she'd be his campaign manager.
Right.
She wanted him to open some kind of a shop so she'd be the business manager, And it kind of gave girls the idea that there was a little more to life than just what Thalia Menninger was doing. Because in the day, because girls couldn't earn their own money and she wanted to be very rich,
right,
she knew she had to attach herself to a rich guy. I mean, Max was really a social commentator and somewhat ahead of his time, I think.
Dobie Gillis, I hate you.
Thalia, you can't mean it.
I certainly do. I hate you.
But why?
Because I love you.
I'm a little confused.
Why, it makes all the sense in the world. Now, what do I want most out of life?
Money.
All right, smart apple.
Somehow this is going to get around to your father's kidney condition. I feel it.
Well, listen, my father worked hard to make me beautiful. Let's take braces, for instance.
By all means, let's take braces.
Now, look at this smile.
Gorgeous.
True, gorgeous. Why, do you know how much money my father spent to put braces on my teeth so I could have a gorgeous smile? Oh, a fortune.
But worth every penny.
Now, look, Dobie, in all conscience, how can I use beautiful, expensive teeth like these to capture a pauper like you? But, why, it's ridiculous. The bait is worth more than the fish.
Bait? Fish? Thalia, I'm still a little confused.
No, you'll always be a little confused, and that's why you'll always be a pauper. To get rich, you need a quick, sharp mind, and... well, you're all muddled and mixed up and confused.
But you love me.
And that's why I hate you. Oh, if I didn't love you, I'd be going with someone with a brilliant future. Someone who'd represent a fair return on all the money invested in these teeth and head and this body. Now, I told you, Dobie, we are through forever. Goodbye.
Thalia! Thalia, you can't be serious. You're kidding, aren't you? Thalia?
It's interesting. I spent actually 14 years in the state legislature out here, and when I was termed out, decided to run for county supervisor, which is sort of like being the governor of Ohio with no legislature. I mean, it's,
right,
a lot of people, a lot of stuff to do. So to raise money, of which you need a lot to run for office, I had a couple of showings of episodes of Dobie, newly restored, beautiful, crisply black and white, And so hundreds of people would come to these things, and they were amazed at how well they held up, as they would put it, how funny they were, how still relevant they were, and how fast-paced they were, so that, because we didn't shoot with an audience, so we didn't wait for laughs.
Right.
And we didn't have a laugh track for the most part. But they were surprised, I guess, at how good they were. But, Max was a novelist. I mean, he was a fine writer, well known, of course. So they were really well crafted, but the themes were also, although they would be outrageous, he would take them sort of, outside the envelope.
Right.
They would be very relevant to people thinking about should they follow an ethical course or cheat. I mean, there was one show where Zelda tricked Dobie into proposing marriage to her.
Right.
And then they stand before this captain of this ship who's going to marry them, and Zelda has a real crisis of conscience because maybe it's not a good thing to get married because you tricked somebody into it.
Right.
So she says, I can't do this. And that happened a lot in the denouement. At the end, people would say, I can't do this to my friends.
Right.
And it wasn't preachy. It was just sort of like the kinds of things that people face. Should I do the right thing or the thing that serves me better?
Maynard get married. Nobody'd ever marry Maynard, so he's perfectly... Zelda, you wouldn't.
Wouldn't I?
You couldn't.
Couldn't I?
You could.
You bet I could, and I will. I'll get him to propose to me, and then there'll be only one way to save him. You'll have to marry me instead.
We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in the bonds of holy matrimony. Forasmuch as these two persons have come hither to be made one, if there is anyone present who knows any just cause why they may not be lawfully joined in marriage, let them speak now or forever hold his peace.
Yes, sir. Me, sir.
You, the bride?
Right. I've got to speak now or forever hold myself to be a cad and a bounder.
All right, Zelda, speak up.
I tricked you into proposing to me, and tricking you is so easy it's unsporting and un-American.
This is, shall we say, most unusual.
Shall we say most cockeyed? Zelda doesn't want to marry Maynard. Maynard doesn't want to marry Zelda. Zelda wants to marry me.
Ooh, it's just like the Late Late Show. The last time I saw this, Ginger Rogers couldn't make up her mind between Randolph Scott or Fred Astaire, but he danced his way into her heart.
Now, before I let you go, I have to ask about your connection not only to the TV series Petticoat Junction, but also to Beatlemania.
Right, Ladybugs.
Yeah. Now, was the intent there to make a novelty record in addition to singing I saw him standing there on the TV show? Because you appeared on Ed Sullivan doing that song as well.
No,
okay.
Not at all. It was, when the Beatles first performed, very much like when Elvis was on Ed Sullivan, people thought they were a fad. They're like this British group, and who can fathom that music and blah, blah. They were always underestimating what young people knew was good and would buy. And so as a sort of joke, they decided that since there were 3 girls there already, they would do like a takeoff on the Beatles, but it was supposed to be funny. And so they wanted a 4th, and I, knew all of them, and they brought me in as the 4th person. And then when Sullivan's person saw it, he thought, well, that would be very funny to have on my show. Again, as a kind of a way of trivializing the Beatles, which is pretty funny.
Right.
But we had a great time. They flew us to New York. They put us up in a fancy hotel. We got to meet Ed Sullivan. It was pretty cool.
Well, you might not know this, but you wound up on a lot of Beatle bootlegs and also bootleg videotapes. Yeah,
there's all kinds of interesting crisscross. In the Stu Erwin Show, at one point we had an interesting, very taciturn guest guy named James Dean. And that's kind of become like a famous episode. Who knew at the time?
And it's probably one of those things where people might say to you, what was he like? And you're thinking, gee, I don't remember much about him. You didn't make that much.
I do remember.
Oh,
he was just very moody, sat off in the corner of the stage by himself. He smoked incessantly, and it wasn't till later when I was a huge, huge fan, and they had a rerun, fortunately, because it was filmed.
Right.
And my sister and I went, oh, my God, that's James Dean.
It's that guy. Now, if people want to catch up with you and what you're doing, I don't know how interested people on the East Coast are with Los Angeles politics, but I'm sure you do a lot of things. I know literacy is a big cause of yours. And where would they go?
Well, there's a lot that we're involved in. I mean, everything that, for instance, the governor of New Jersey is concerned with, the county of Los Angeles is, because counties carry out state programs.
Right.
So, healthcare, mental health, public health, transportation, foster kids, jails, we do it all. I have a website, obviously, Supervisor Kuehl, all one word, KUEHL.com. People can just go on my website. It's kind of interesting. They could even sign up for Cool Happenings, which we send out every Saturday just to say kind of what happened in the county that day or that I did.
Mm-hmm.
But supervisorkuehl.com will get them there.
Well, again, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today, and you have a great rest of your day.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for asking.
1, 2, 3, 4.